Awesome.
Okay. So we're going to talk about the virtue of extreme self-honesty. And that sounds kind of obvious, but it's actually a really big deal, because in a lot of ways, a lot of very subtle ways, we deceive ourselves and create lots of problems in life as a result. So we want to be able to identify self-deceptions as they pop up rather than suffer the consequences. We want to understand how we do this, why we do this, so we can call ourselves out and do something better instead. Correct life decisions require correct information. So we can't be as successful unless we're honest and we deal with the truth of reality and the truth of ourselves. It's an attitude for lasting success in life. So self-deception, it's basically when we fool ourselves into believing something false, which blocks us from seeing the truth and creates troubles and obstacles, excuses and limitations that get in the way. We might confuse our fears and think that they're facts and behave accordingly. We might think that our feelings are facts and behave accordingly. We might think that our opinions are facts and behave accordingly. And if we've got it wrong, it can be a blind obedience to an unconscious hypnotic influence. And it's easier for us to see this in other people than it is in ourselves. But have you ever seen somebody that was just so convinced of something they were so dead wrong about, and yet would just not let it go?
Of course.
Absolutely. So most people's problems are because they lie to themselves. So there is a positive side to this, though. There is one ally we have, which is positive illusions. So this can be a good thing when the end justifies the means. And the real instance of that is when, an outlook might be bleak, then using an optimistic way of seeing it, even if it's not entirely accurate, can pay off for success on the job, in sports, in school, and even in health. They've shown optimism can lower blood pressure, immune function, better recovery, because it leads to hope, confidence, and a greater sense of control when the odds might be stacked against us. So that's the one exception. But other than that, there's a lot of reasons why this isn't a good thing.
Okay.
And of course, it should be a little bit of optimism, not too much, not too blown out of proportion, and can certainly help us out. So there's basically 6 faces of self-deception. Okay. 6 of them. We're going to go through all 6, and you're just going to try to see if you can recognize how this might have showed up in your life. That's it. We need to be really good at developing the radar for these 6. Okay. Now, it's not fun to realize when we personally do these things, but it's also not fun to deceive ourselves and suffer the consequences. So there's going to be more pain if we don't do it. So in order to not be a slave to wrong judgments and wrong thinking and endure the harm of that, we have to have the courage to be able to find this stuff in ourselves. To do so is a triumph of a mature ego. You up for the challenge?
I'm up for the challenge. I like how you use the word radar. I feel like that's a really solid way of just like explaining like awareness and looking out for these things.
Absolutely. And that's going to be our goal, is developing our radar here today, one step at a time, right? And our self-deceptions block us from seeing our self-deceptions. That's why it's kind of like, this can be, we really have to be ready to, we really have to be ready and motivated to do this. So, and if somebody's not, I would say, tell me about a time in your life when you felt powerful. And I just say that. Can you tell me about a time in your life when you felt powerful? So for example, if I were to say that to you, what example might you give me right now?
I don't know, like finishing a track and field race.
Perfect. In the same way that you finish that track and field race and those feelings of power and being in control, we're filling you. We're going to be able to finish going through this and finish identifying how and when these show up in our life, right?
Perfect.
And what we want to do is, as long as we feel a good sense of control going in, we're more likely to be honest. We often lie to ourselves when we don't feel in control. And so it's harder to do this work if somebody doesn't feel in control. So we always want to start with just priming ourselves, right? And a good way to do that, research has shown, is just remembering a time when you felt powerful. So let's go for number one. Pattern number one is the reality rejector. So this is various forms of denial. Okay, this is denying a problem, maybe an addiction problem, abuse, a temper problem, a mood management problem, anything like that. Denying a desire. So a lot of times people repress these unacceptable wishes they have, and so they pretend like they don't want something they really want, and they numb themselves to repress some like wild desires they have. Or they deny a reality, like what's actually going on, the truth of reality and the truth of their own potential and who and what they really are. So there's a lot of ways in which we might incorporate denial. Can you think of any examples off the top of your head?
Denial of reality. Well, I guess like in my life, I've seen like individuals kind of just not be as present. So I felt like they were always kind of maybe forecasting future or maybe living out their past again. So that could be a way of denying like what's happening now is not being in the present moment.
Yeah.
You know, those people that you talk to and it kind of seems like they're already forecasting, like they're not actually there. They're not actually listening.
They're not even living in the moment.
No.
They're escaping, right? Another thing could be like if somebody's like shouting and they're like, I'm not angry. It's like, or they're crying and telling people they're happy when they're really sad. Or, another example could be using exaggerating, misleading metaphors or misleading terms. Like saying you stabbed me in the back is not a true statement. Like, show me the wound. Where's the knife? And people might say there's no good women out there, or there's no good men out there. And it's like, you don't know that for sure. You can't make that statement. Or that was the worst day ever. And it's like, you can't say that. Like that's, you have no way of knowing that. Or I have the worst boss in the world. Like all these statements, when we lie to ourselves like that, our nervous system takes those words at face value and we get physiologically worked up and we become triggered and reactive by using this kind of emotionally twisted language. And it's a big deal to our body on a physiological level. And we're narrating the truth of reality in a way that's not very accurate, right? So it's important not to use these disempowering, exaggerated terms, overgeneralizations, the way in which we describe reality. We should try to keep it more accurate and not weaken ourselves and discourage ourselves as a result, right?
Another solid example I know, even in the beginning of when I hurt myself, the way I was talking about it, it was kind of like, I remember saying things like, oh, I can't do that. Oh, I couldn't do that. There's no way, like things like disempowering words, and instead of saying like, okay, I'm not able to do it right now. That, you know what I mean? So just, yeah, I can see that statement.
And I would call some of that stuff out and saying, you're denying the truth of your potential.
Right.
Right. Which is a big thing when people say, when they say, I suck, I'm no good and whatever, and blah, blah. Then I call them out on that. It's like, you're an eagle pretending to be a chicken. It's like, no, why are you disrespecting yourself in that way and creating a narrative that's so disempowering, right? So common consequences of denial is feeling fake. When people do denial a lot, they feel fake, like they've lost their identity or never formed it in the first place. It's because they're not living authentically and they're denying the truth of reality and the truth of the self, right? And so indulging in self-deception for too long, we don't really know what we want anymore. It also leads to constant anxiousness, because if you haven't been living in authentic truth, a part of you knows that eventually one day you're going to have to face the music. Right. And people don't really know this. They just know they got anxiousness. They feel fake. And then repeated bouts of frustration and disappointment. This happens when we get unmet expectations. And usually we have unmet expectations because we're not seeing reality accurately. We take our preferences for reality and we make them our expectations for reality. We'll say things like, it's not supposed to rain because I'm going for a hike later today. Or I'm supposed to get this job promotion because I've earned it and I'm next in line or whatever. And we make all these rules, and then we struggle with our frustrations because there's a big gap between how we insist reality is supposed to be and how reality is. And the bigger that gap, the more we suffer. So here's the thing. It's like a prison we put ourselves into, this reality rejectors pattern. But there is a freedom key, okay? And a freedom key could be a question that breaks us out of it. And a question could be, am I in denial about some uncomfortable truths, right? And how much more discomfort will there be if I don't face this stuff now? Yeah. So it's a good question because, the things we're in denial about are usually painful, but also crucial to our overall development, right? And so a lot of times our fears aren't justified. We might be just acting a little bit cowardly, but it's not really proportionate. We're safe, but we convince ourselves we're unsafe. And so we use a lot of denial in many cases. Sometimes people just don't have the mental strength to deal with it right now, and they need to park it until later. But anyway, that's pattern number one. Now let's go on to pattern number two, is victimhood fantasizing, pretending to be a victim when you're not. Okay. And this is usually, there's various forms of blaming that happens here. We imagine ourselves to be victims. We play the blame game, but when you blame, you stay the same. Okay. And if you had some responsibility in co-creating a problem and you're just blaming everyone else, then you are doomed to co-create it again in future because you are rebelling against redemption by blaming and deferring your personal responsibility, and therefore not doing what it takes to improve yourself, right? So we'll tell people that other people in outside circumstances have victimized us as a way to avoid our own personal responsibility. Okay, so here's a bunch of examples. You might complain that you were the negative victim of a company that you quit, when really you were just doing a poor job and you kept breaking the rules, right? You might say you failed an exam because the teacher gave too many trick questions, but really you didn't study enough. You might say, so-and-so ruined my day, but really attitude is a choice, and you chose the attitude that your day is ruined. You might say, if somebody says you're being angry and temperamental, you might say, this is the way I am because of because of the fact I'm Irish, I've got an Irish background, or this is the way I am because of my childhood, right?
Yeah.
When really you are responsible for your actions in this moment, right? A big one is when people say, I've tried my best, I've done everything, when it's not true. There's more that could be done. But you're pretending to be a victim that has no power in the matter. We haven't applied the right effort in the right moments, in the right amounts. We haven't asked for help when we should have. We haven't sought clarity where we're confused. I'll tell people when they say this, I'll say, have you been 10 out of 10 motivated to handle this yet? And really, they were only ever giving a half-hearted effort when they use this to just be a victim, pretend to be a victim like they're done, right?
Yeah.
Any examples you can think of?
For me, I'm just thinking of like the blame game. I feel like there's a lot of examples of situations where we could blame other people for our lack of action.
Yeah.
So in the workplace, maybe in relationships and family, I feel like that's a really big one that I can think of off the top of my head.
Yeah. And it's a way that we defer that responsibility by blaming others, but there's a way out of that. I mean, and that can create a cycle of pain. If you're going to blame others, prepare for pain in life. Prepare for pain in life, because the truth is, like, what's that statement? When you're pointing one finger out there's three pointing back.
One point. Yeah. I love that one.
If you aren't taking responsibility and making the effort to say, where am I responsible, instead of who's at fault, then you are really, you're really in a collision. You're really on path for a collision course. You should, if you want to get in the express lane, the way to do it is to ask yourself, how am I responsible? How am I responsible? Just rep that question to fatigue. How am I responsible? And then take extreme ownership. Just assume you're responsible for everything. That's a way better way to live, right?
It's so true.
And
Yeah.
and
And
even
maybe it's just easier, like I think in terms of like this victimhood, it's just easier like temporarily, like within our mind, to just point at someone and then disregard it as our own responsibility, right?
yeah, true. It's like candy. It's like very sweet in the moment, and then you just feel awful after, and you're not really
Basically.
sure why. Yeah. So we want to think like, how am I responsible for the things I blame on other people? So that's pattern number 2. Okay.
Okay.
Now, number 3 is fools of feeling. We get stuck in being a fool of feeling. And this is emotional reasoning. Now, this is a very important one because the other 2 are more obvious: denial and, blaming. But emotional reasoning gets a lot of people, and it's where we confuse our feelings for facts, and we think that our feelings accurately reflect reality. So, for example, if 2 people have a conflict and you see that after the fact one person is crying and upset, you might think, well, they must be innocent because I saw how upset they were, when really perhaps they did a lot of wicked things and they're upset because they didn't get their way. But we might side with them and we might enable them and soothe them and take their side because we are trusting feeling as an indicator of truth. And we might do this in many different ways. We incorrectly assume cause and effect, jump to the wrong conclusions. Here's some examples. Somebody might say, I'm bored, therefore I married the wrong person, right? When really you're bored because you're making the choice not to do something more exciting with your life in this moment, like go learn something new or whatever, right? But somebody might say, I felt bad about myself after the conversation we had, so you must have done something bad to me. When really, maybe your ego just got a reality check and it was actually really good for you, Somebody might say, my back hurts today, therefore, the personal trainer did something wrong to me during our workout 5 days ago, when really maybe it was the gardening you did for 8 hours yesterday, right?
That's a good one.
So somebody might say, I don't feel good right now, therefore I'm not good enough as a human being. When really you just ate some expired yogurt a few hours ago and you're letting your physiology influence your psychology, right? Or people will say, I feel this to be true, and I feel I shouldn't be here. And it's like, your feelings aren't facts. Your feelings aren't facts. We make judgments based on how we feel, but feeling is not a criteria for truth. It's very misleading because we always prefer comfort, and the comfortable thing to do is often not the right thing to do. There's always a tempting wrong comfort we can choose instead of the right progressive thing in life. Smokers feel good when they smoke and bad when they don't. Crackheads feel good when they get high and then lousy for pretty much the rest of the day, So we want to be able to verify that truth. Any thoughts on this?
I can't think of any examples.
Okay, well, one strong example is this. When somebody else is suffering, we may want to jump in and soothe their suffering right away. We don't want people to suffer. But if we come in, we might block them from learning and growing from the experience, because sometimes we learn best through suffering. It gets our attention that we did some wrong things in life. And we learn those lessons best when we learn them through suffering. If we don't vilify suffering and pain, it gets our attention. That's what compels us to make new choices in life sometimes. When the fruit is ripe, it falls from the tree. Same thing with people and change. Suffering is that ripening factor that prepares people for change. A lot of times people don't change until they hit rock bottom in some way, or it feels like they hit rock bottom. But the big way that fools of feeling and emotional reasoning affects people is through enabling people to stay stuck in their disempowering patterns of living a human life and crippling their progress and growth, because we keep trying to soothe them before they hit that tipping point of suffering in which they will say, it's not working out for me. I need to change my ways. But if other people don't like seeing them suffering, they're always kind of like, oh no, you're innocent. You're doing a good job. The problem is outside you. It's them. Right. And they kind of affirm, they affirm the victimhood. And then people become fragile because we treat them fragile. And that's where fools of feeling comes in a lot in life. You see it in these patterns of people just becoming, infantile as adults because they're just being treated way too fragile, right? When instead we should encourage. The question we should ask instead of enabling is, how can I help others find their inner strength to solve their problems, right? You can start off by asking them to describe a time when they felt powerful in life, right?
That's
and then
solid.
let's take what you did then and let's apply it to the problem you have now. I know it's overwhelming and I know it's challenging, but so was this other problem that you dealt with in the past. This is just the same. You just tap into those inner resources inside you, your maximum motivation, your discipline, focus, and all these things. Let's just apply it to this situation. You can do this, right? So anyway.
Okay.
But, a good check-in question for this is, my feelings aren't facts. Where's the proof of what's really going on? Or am I confusing my feelings for facts? Like, we need a quick freedom key from this prison we put ourselves into. Okay, so that's pattern number 3. Emotional reasoning, right? Mm-hmm. It could be like, well, I feel like that person was being here's an example. I don't know, this is stupid. It's not even real life. I watched the Muppet movie, and there was this agent, and his name was like Dominic Bad Guy. And he was clearly a villain trying to like sign the Muppets. And the Muppets are like, oh, I really like him. I feel like he's a good guy, and blah, blah, blah. And meanwhile, he was the villain who was coming off so nice and so friendly and everything else. And, and even his name was Bad Guy,
Yeah.
And yet, because of feeling, the Muppets got tricked into it because they felt like he was good and had good intentions when he didn't. He had bad intentions, but he was really good at masking it and making it seem like good intentions. So, all right, next one is, the next pattern is being a defender of evil deeds, right? Which is where we use self-justifications and we excuse bad behavior, justifying injustices. So people rationalize all sorts of bad, selfish, and manipulative behavior and tell themselves stories to justify their misconduct and invent reasons to defend their unwholesome actions. The key thing here is that evil in human history has always derived its strength from delusion. And it's derived its strength from avoiding being pinned down as evil. There's this saying that the devil doesn't like to admit its own devilry, right? So it's like all of the greatest atrocities of mankind were because people were convinced there was no evil behind what they were doing. Think about the Crusades, right? Or witch burning, like, this isn't evil, we're getting rid of evil, right? Or genocide, like, oh, these aren't real humans, they're savages, it's okay to kill them. Like, we kind of come up with our own standards of morality all of a sudden, and all of a sudden bad things aren't bad anymore, they're good. And that's really what self-justification is all about. And it's, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. A lot of times people think, well, my intentions are good, so therefore it's not evil, right? And it's like, no, you know what, evil is still evil no matter what it is, right? So that's one of the tricks. So there's a lot of ways in which this might show up. It might show up because people might say, I didn't lie to you, you just misunderstood me, when really you told a blatant lie, right? Like, that's an example of self-justification.
It also makes me think a little bit about impression management, like trying to like manage others' expectations of you. Maybe you're like lying in the process to try to upkeep that that impression?
Yes. Yeah. So people will, a lot of people will be happy to ruin someone else's life just to not make themselves look bad.
Yeah.
Right. Which is, also considered an evil thing to do. Like, you're just a slave to the ego. You're not really free if you're a slave to the ego, and you're doing the ego's bidding, evil bidding in that situation. Right. So, yeah. Another example of self-justification somebody might say, it was okay to have a marital affair on my spouse because I was unhappy and it was my wife's fault or my husband's fault, right? When really, no, it's nobody made you do that. Your happiness is your own responsibility, first of all. And that has nothing to do with having an affair. Just because you're unhappy does not give you a get out of jail free card to go ahead and do evil, right? In that situation, right? And create more harm for so many other innocent people, right? So another example might be, I wouldn't have lied if you didn't make me feel bad, right? Which is kind of like tit for tat. It's like, two wrongs make a right. Like, even if somebody made you feel bad and did it in a bad way, two wrongs don't make a right, as has always been said. And really, like, just because somebody made you feel bad, that's also emotional reasoning. Because they made you feel bad doesn't mean they did a bad thing. You might have interpreted it in a bad way because of ego. Your ego didn't like it. Impression management, because maybe it was a wake-up call that you didn't like. It was some unwelcome news that you didn't like that somebody had to tell you, right?
Right.
Maybe you were being selfish and they didn't give you what you wanted, and that's why you felt bad, right? So,
yeah.
Somebody might say, well, I wouldn't have acted so mean if you didn't offend me. Like, there's a whole bunch of different reasons why, people do this kind of stuff. And, bullies claim that the victims deserved what they got in order to avoid a sense of guilt. So it's very common that when people are doing evil things, they will vilify the victims. And they will try to convince themselves and everyone else that the people they have victimized are actually the real villains. And they'll often do it through projection. They'll say, well, they're the real problem. They're doing this and blah, blah, and they lie and they manipulate and control people and blah, blah, blah. And so that's a way that their ego can be happy with themselves. You can be a happy villain if you're making your victims seem like villains, right?
Right.
So,
and you can spin it however you want, right? Like, you could always find like justification for what you do if you're looking for that, right?
Yeah. Like, sometimes, and sometimes when people try to give help, you might lash out and be cruel and mean and aggressive and intense and unfair. And then you might say, look, I'm just a strong person who stands up for myself. And when really, now you're just defending your cruel behavior and fighting to stay stuck in your cruel, mean-spirited habits. Like, don't tell yourself you're a strong person who stands up for yourself when people are trying to bring justice to what you're doing. And now you're looking at it as a sign of strength to stay committed to these behaviors, right?
Yeah.
But that's another example. So I always think of Thomas Edison and Tesla with this one, where Thomas Edison hired Tesla to improve his DC generation plants. And Edison apparently promised him $50,000 if he could do that, thinking it was probably an impossible undertaking. But, Tesla spent several months of hard work and dedication. He really needed the money. And then he succeeded. And when he asked to be paid, Edison said, oh, that was just a joke. Thank you very much. Right? And, when you become a full-fledged American, you'll understand an American joke, which basically, and then, Tesla was shocked and resigned, right? Like, just kind of like, how could he do this to me? But it was really self-justification. Edison broke a promise. If the facts are true, Edison broke a promise and vilified the victim. Oh, you just are completely confused. You don't understand American humor because you're not an American like I am. So you're just beneath us. You don't understand. We're so advanced, you can't even understand us, right? Like, it was, but that was an example of self-justification, defending evil deeds, right?
Wow.
As as JP Morgan once said, there's two reasons we do things, a good reason and the real reason. So the real reason is often selfishness. So we try to come up with something good instead. Right. And we do this, a big way this shows up is making excuses for the evil deeds of other people. So you'll see this like with like abusive relationships and toxic relationships, like, oh, it's okay that they did all of these terrible things because they're just stressed. Or it's okay they did all these terrible things because they're sleep deprived. All right. Or, don't worry about it. It's not a big deal. It's getting better. Right. This is the common approach to physical and emotional abuse, is to defend it. Right. And just use self-justification. Right. And people might even denounce requests to restore justice. Right. And just say, if people are like, well, we need to make amends, they'll be like, well, you're being unreasonable. It's not his fault. He was sleep deprived. He was stressed. You're overthinking it. So that's another way people make the excuses for it. And the problem is that with emotional reasoning, people get pulled into this because, they get sucked into a story, right?
Right.
So, usually when somebody's doing evil, they can become quite deluded fanatics and try to get everyone on their side. And liars tend to be the first to go to other people and spread their self-serving lies in a fanatical way so that, they can influence and bias people's perspectives, right? It's like they spread rumors that make themselves look good and make everyone else look bad. So it can be easy to get pulled into that, especially if we're deceiving ourselves with how we come to the truth, right? And there's more we can talk about with that. But basically, when it comes down to enabling, we put our emotional needs, not wanting to see other people suffer, before the interests of the progress of the individual. So anyways, that is that there. So the main thing here is with this self-justification, like we defend these misery-making habits, selfishness, moodiness, negativity, but you reap what you sow. Evil thrives in the shadows. We need to shed some light into the darkness, and just honesty is that you got to get down to the bottom of what happened in order to understand it and make sure it doesn't happen again. Because evil is the great betrayer of happiness. That's what makes evil evil. It takes us away from happiness and other people, right? Yeah. So a good question might be, am I justifying any injustices? Am I making excuses for doing bad things? Right? So that's some of the good things we can ask ourselves there. Any thoughts on that one?
No, I like that question. I feel like that question would easily kind of just help you navigate through.
Yeah, absolutely. And a question directs our subconscious thinking. So instead of lying to ourselves, that question's likely to put ourselves under, create a chain reaction in our flow of thoughts that brings us to self-honesty. So it kind of diverts.
Am I justifying evil?
It diverts our thought habits to self-honesty. So the next category 5, is the ashamed attacker. So this is a shamed attacker. It's usually all about unfair criticizing in the forms of projection, denigration, and defensiveness. So this comes out as harsh and hasty judgments is one thing people will do, because expectation guides perception. So we see what we expect to see. So oftentimes people assume that other people think the way they do under the surface. So if they have evil intentions, they assume the worst in other people. A cheater is often the most suspicious of cheating, as they say, right?
True. Yeah.
So people make harsh and hasty judgments. People who have, intent to do harmful things will assume that in others. And because expectation guides perception, we see that in others. We would interpret neutral things as being evidence that this person is trying to be controlling and manipulative, and then we might say something like, we might claim somebody is a horrible person, and then we might double down and say, I have a pretty good sense for these things. Like,
oh God, yeah, heard that one before.
And then tell other people that, hey, look, this person's fake, and actually they're not really a nice person. They're actually really mean, and they're trying to use everybody, and they're going to try to worm their way to the top in this. I have a pretty good sense for these things. It's like, oh God. Okay. So anyway.
I've heard that one for sure.
Oh yeah. Yeah. As if that is adding a layer of virtue and an angelic quality to your unfair criticisms. So
a layer of virtue.
Another example of how people would do this, the ashamed attackers, projection. We attack what we're trying to hide inside us. So we demonize other people for having qualities we're ashamed of in ourselves, right? So we can often spread gossip about somebody, about a flaw in ourselves, so that if anybody turns it back to us, then people would just logically reject it as just a blind retaliation. Oh, you're just saying that because they were the one that exposed that you're doing all those things, right?
Right.
So that's what they do. Instead, they try to throw it outside there to safeguard themselves. And so that's an example. Denigration is when we attack what we secretly like. So unfairly criticizing someone or something to ward off a part of ourselves that secretly likes it. So a good example of this would be somebody who's extremely homophobic and mean to the homosexual population because they are a repressed homosexual, right?
Got it.
So that would be a common example. Some people would make fun of like rich people, and rich people are the worst and they're so greedy, when in reality they wish they were rich, right? Like, or the famous people, and famous people are the worst, when in reality you wish you had that fame. So sometimes it's fueled by a sense of envy, right?
Yeah, that one I've seen as well. Just like also like saying, oh, they have money, but they have money. So like layering that down as if it's easy for them. They have it easier or whatever it is, right?
Yeah, attacking what we secretly like. So they might be like, I secretly love money, so I'm gonna attack those with money. Like. So that's one. Now another one is defensiveness. Defensiveness is when we attack unwelcome news, particularly when people are trying to help us, rebelling against feedback, being very difficult when receiving feedback, either turning the table and trying to insult the person that's making excuses, and basically rebelling against redemption itself. Okay. For example, somebody might give somebody a reality check they really need because they're creating a lot of misery and suffering. And then they might respond harshly with, what do you know? Who are you to tell me what to do? You don't know what you're talking about. Your life is a mess, right? Or you don't understand. You're an idiot. You've screwed up your life, blah, blah. You don't know anything, right? So the most guilty are often the most triggered, okay? Yeah. Triggers and reactiveness, beneath it all is usually a disempowering lie. So a big way to find those who lie to themselves is find those who are getting triggered and reactive. It's a really good sign that that's happening. So a good question might be, in order to break out of this pattern, am I clever enough to see in myself the things I criticize in others? Am I clever enough to see in myself the things I criticize in others? Right? And then I might even ask a secondary question like, what am I trying to hide? And how much pain will there be? How much more is it? How is this fear irrational? How is it disproportionate? How much more pain will there be if I don't do something about it now? Right? And usually it's like an impression management thing. It's an ego thing, typically. Like they just want to look good to everybody. And right deep down, they just want to look good because they want to feel worthy. And they want to feel worthy because they want to feel loved. And they're afraid of just not being loved in life. And really, doing a lot of this dishonest behavior, criticizing and denying and pretending to be a victim and trying evil ways to get a quick feeling of power and all this stuff. They're just bad strategies for acquiring, for loving. They're bad strategies for creating love in life. And it's like, let's just admit this stuff isn't working out. And so we choose something better, instead of staying a slave to these terrible habits. So pattern number 6 6 is ambassadors of arrogance. So this is various forms of bias.
You have the best terminology, I'm telling you.
Yeah, I mean, I just make up fun terms and titles.
So that's why I'm laughing, because I'm just like, oh, so clever.
But it's almost like mental opponents. Like you're in a hero's journey, and these are opponents you're going to face. Or like they're like bosses at the end of a level in a video game. Like these are the 6 bosses, and you need to figure out their pattern so you can defeat them, right? Otherwise, they're just going to pummel you into submission, right?
Love it. Yeah.
So that's the way we want to think about these. And this is kind of like the battle plan that we're discussing. So ambassadors of arrogance, various forms of, egotistical behavior, assuming we know best. Here's some of the main ways this shows up. One is coming to clumsy conclusions, forming an opinion without studying the facts, and then convincing ourselves we have a balanced and accurate point of view when we truly haven't used a fair standard of evidence. So it's like taking a firm position on an issue without giving fair consideration to both sides. Convincing ourselves something that we don't really know for sure. We don't know the full story, but we think and act like we do. For example, if there's a conflict and somebody comes to you and they give you their side of the story and they're really emotional about it, you might think you don't even need to hear the other side of the story because you're using emotional reasoning as a dictate of truth. And so you might be totally deluded now yourself. And you might be in collusion with some form of evil because you didn't get both sides of the story even, right? So, we confuse cause and effect in many times, coming to clumsy conclusions. So here's something. This is really funny because it is cold and winter out right now. Have you ever heard of this thing where people say that they can tell the weather's going to change because of an ache in their knee joints? Like, oh, it's going to rain because my knees hurt yesterday and this and that. And, and that their knee is somehow like a barometer for temperature. Like, and I've never seen it on the news, like a weather report and like, hey, my Aunt Bessie's arthritic knees say that we're going to have precipitation tomorrow, like.
Oh God. There's another good one where it's like, oh, I feel like crummy today because it's raining outside, or like I want to sleep more because it's raining.
Yeah. And another thing is that 13 is an unlucky number, right?
That's my favorite number.
Superstitions are another thing where it's kind of like a clumsy conclusion. Thinking that the walk buttons work when you're like downtown, the crosswalk buttons, you hit those buttons and you're like, I don't think this thing does anything. And it's like, but we still hit it. And apparently like 80% of them have been deactivated. And it's all on a timer now. It's just a placebo thing.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, like 80% of them don't even like, I know that in New York in particular, 80% of them have been deactivated. And downtown Toronto, like downtown Toronto, it's like, don't bother touching the button. Like it's going to change no matter what you do. It's on a timer, right? So
it's so true.
There's all kinds of things we do. We often overgeneralize when we come to a clumsy conclusion. We take a single negative event for a finite conclusion. So if we have a bad breakup, we think, I'm always going to be alone. And that's a clumsy conclusion. If you got denied a promotion at work, you think, I'm never going to be successful, right? If you have one bad day, you think, I'm never going to be happy, right? So people may do that. They may do anchoring bias, which is, you are overly influenced by the first piece of information you hear. For example, if you're told gossip about somebody, that gossip influences all future interactions with that person. So if somebody says, oh, by the way, before you meet Johnny, just know that he's really conceited. And then you meet that person and they're really nice. And you're like, I'm waiting for it. I'm waiting for the brag, the humble brag. And it never happens. And you realize the person who told you that is conceited. Johnny's not conceited. You were subject to just being anchored and biased in the first piece of information you heard. Right. Yeah. So I heard of an example that somebody would do. It's like, if they were going to a party and there were girls there and there's a guy showing up who's attractive, they would tell all the girls in advance that this guy is a creep so that it would ruin that guy's chances of getting with any girls, and they would look more attractive by default. Be like, oh, by the way, before Henry shows up, just giving everyone a warning, like, I'm looking out for everybody, and Henry is actually a creep. Okay, just everyone be careful. So then when Henry shows up, it's like, why don't any of these girls want to talk to me? What's going on? When really the creep is the one who is telling everyone that the innocent guy who's a good guy is a creep, right? So and then people get anchored in that. They don't realize they've been misled. So groupthink is another thing, or sheeple, where people are like sheep and they just follow the herd. And we assume a lot of people think a certain way about something means it must be true, instead of thinking for ourselves. And, there was a study in which they drew 2 lines on a blackboard, and the lower line was way shorter than the upper line. Okay. And they would submit 5 students to test one at a time, and 4 of them were fake. And they were told to declare that the bottom line, which is clearly shorter, to say it was longer. So, and everyone would watch. You see the first guy go, he says, the bottom line is really shorter. And they're like, the bottom line is longer, definitely. Next person goes in, the bottom line is longer. Next person goes in, bottom line was longer, bottom line was longer. Then the last person to go in 80% of the time would deny the truth of their own vision and say that the bottom line was longer just because everyone else did, because of groupthink.
Yeah.
Right? It's kind of like when people get in a lineup when it's not really the right place to get in line and nobody checked. Everyone's in a lineup to go nowhere, right? So anyway, that's coming to clumsy conclusions. That's why we should be more humbly aware and self-honest about our ability to think we got it right and be completely wrong. And so we don't hold our beliefs too rigidly. That's what this comes down to. Another thing is that because of like confirmation bias, people will insulate themselves from reality checks and become psychologically fossilized, because they'll only pay attention to information that confirms their current beliefs. They're not interested in truth. They're just interested in being proved right. Okay, so they live in a bubble, and they surround themselves only with influences that share their views on politics, conspiracy, and everything else. They withdraw from everyone and everything that challenges their viewpoints, right? So that's what people do. Another thing is overvaluing our own opinions. So people often think we know better than everyone else. We confuse our opinions for facts. We believe our way is the only way. And a lot of times what it comes down to is this. A lot of times people think their opinion is superior because it comes from them. It's an ego thing. And they dismiss other viewpoints. They might even get angry when they hear other viewpoints and vilify people with other viewpoints. And they'll often overestimate how much other people agree with them. And they'll say, well, look, everybody agrees with me. And it's like, oh, really? Let's put it to a vote and see if it's unanimous. So that's one of the ways in which people will be an ambassador of arrogance, overvaluing their own opinion, and then rallying the herd. Like they try to pull everyone onto their side. They might do this by, so that other people affirm their position, So they might manipulate others to take their side on matters by bending the truth, twisting the facts, telling lies, getting really emotional and fanatical so that people give in and start to believe. And there's also a form of self-deception called misinformation effect, where we remember past events as being different than they were in order to serve our current narrative. We incorrectly remember in order to serve the narrative we're creating right now. So our memories are heavily influenced by what happens after the event. So let's say you had a falling out with person or a breakup. Well, you might put words in their mouth, things they said that were mean and unfair that they didn't actually say, and add in and embellish all these other details in your memories in order to give strength to your side of the story, right? So another way that's another kind of silly example is food journaling is misinformation. How much we ate and when we ate, it's shown that some people lie on food journals, eyewitness accounts that were dead wrong, things ex-boyfriends or girlfriends said and did. We change the details and change the words and use it to prove our point to others and muddy the truth of what happened to get other people on our side. Like that's usually what happens here. Okay. So those are all examples of being an ambassador of arrogance. And it really comes down to this. Here's what we need to ask ourselves. Have I got all the facts straight before forming an opinion? Have I got all the facts straight before forming an opinion? Because oftentimes we get lazy and we come to a conclusion before we've done a fair amount of investigation. Okay?
Yeah.
Right? We could also remind ourselves, I don't know what I don't know. I have such capacity to be wrong. I've done it before. We could remind ourselves, we could ask ourselves, am I interested in getting to the truth of matters, or am I just trying to prove I'm right? You know, it's important that we hold our beliefs lightly and stay curious, right? Hold our beliefs lightly because our beliefs can be so wrong, and just stay curious, you know, verify our assumptions. So that's the 6 patterns. Now, the reason we lie to ourselves is often not a great reason. Like, one is to regain a sense of control, because doing nothing drives us nuts. So we prefer to do something, often the wrong thing, than do nothing. Okay.
Right.
So for the ego, regain control. We feel powerful when we come up with a lie. It's like, yes, I'm back in command. Okay.
Yeah.
So people have this lust for power and control to offset fears deep down, right? So fear is another reason, right? We don't have the psychological strength to make different choices because of our fears. So we don't have the strength to do the right thing right now. We've convinced ourselves we don't. You know, another reason is to save face, pride. We want to avoid potential embarrassment and make ourselves look good, and we're willing to make everyone else look bad and ruin and tarnish character and all create a scandal we benefit from, and all kinds of things, right? So being too proud to admit to ourselves that we need help, be too proud to admit our responsibility, that we don't know what we don't know. You know, we pretend we got it all figured out when we don't. And we tell ourselves we know what we're doing when we don't. Self-interest is another one. Greed, envy, lust. People will tell lies to in order to fulfill any of those 7 deadly sins, right? To bend perception. One example is that, you know, doctors have been known to order tests that people don't really need, but which they stand to profit from, right? And I've heard of somebody else who, you know, they worked at a medical clinic, a health sports medicine clinic, where the doctor would order all these different assessments somebody didn't need that they had to pay for, and would always put the assessment they needed last and just say that they're being extra thorough, when really they're just capitalizing financially off of getting everyone to do all these unnecessary tests all the time, right? And that was their business model.
Yeah.
And, you know, that's a bit of greed, right? Like, you're taking people for a ride, you know? Yeah. So, yeah, and comfort. Comfort is a reason people do it. It's more comfort. People prefer to tell comforting lies rather than face uncomfortable truths. You know, it creates a short-term calmness. The misery we know feels right, so we imagine that the unknown misery is worse because it's painful to revise our maps of the world. So it's an adaptive mechanism to avoid pain in many ways, but it also damages our chances for happiness, and it dooms us to misery and anxiousness and frustration. Anxiousness and frustration, 2 big ones, right? As we discussed.
Yeah.
Feeling fake, right? So let's talk about how we can best achieve self-honesty. Okay.
Yeah.
How we can best. Number 1, maximize your motivation to succeed. You have to be highly motivated to overcome this. You have to know, like, why is it an absolute must to choose self-honesty instead of self-deception? What pain have all of these things caused in the past? What pain are all of these things causing right now? You know, my arrogance, my using emotional reasoning, my, you know, attacking other people, my victimhood mentality, my denial of my responsibility. How is this creating problems in the present? And you know, what are the worst possible outcomes for my future if I continue to do this? Will I ruin friendships? Will people not trust me? Am I burning bridges? You know, why is this a bad idea? You know, how does it create disharmony within me? How does it make me not like myself? How does it create disharmony with other people and disconnect me from people that are good and add value to my life? How does it create disharmony with life and reality that I'm in? right? Like life in reality seems horrible under these circumstances if we're just a victim and we have no control all the time, right? Like, and then we can think, what are the best possible outcomes if you pledge allegiance to this? Dealing with challenges better relationships, more trust, more success at work, more inner peace. We want to be able to create, really, let's maximize all the pain that this is causing, past, present, and future. Maximize all the pleasure it would cause. It would create for us to live with self-honesty, past and in the future. We want to get the motivation to the boiling point. Okay. Any thoughts on that? How would you motivate yourself if you needed to get your motivation to the boiling point?
Well, for me, it would just be about like longer term fulfillment, like instead of keeping like these short term, I guess, short term fixes, aren't going to lead to those like long term fulfillment or happiness, right? That would be my greatest driving force, I think.
Yeah, you're betraying the future you if you do this.
Yeah.
Because
also, like, yeah, sorry.
Because you'll be at a standstill in your current life problems and difficulties until you face the music.
And yeah, I think even like beyond that, like just feeling more aligned and authentic is another source of fulfillment down the road, and you can help the people around you too, right?
Yeah, like think about what your mission in life is here. Is it to do all these things and get your way in the short term and feel like you're powerful and in control right now? Or is it, because you actually, want to leave a positive legacy and create good, thriving relationships in your life? Like think about what you want and who you have to be to get what you want. Right. And then
100%.
And then what do I need to do more of and what do I need to do less of? Like, these are good things to think about. Like, why are we here? Are we here to just tell a whole bunch of lies and then be worm food? Like, is that the purpose, or is the purpose to overcome some of these things inside ourselves? So that's step one, is a cooking lesson. Get your motivation to a boiling point. Turn up the heat on the pain. Okay. Until you're like, that's it, I had enough. Then step two is to build your radar.
Yeah.
View your thoughts and judgments like an outside observer every day for 7 days in a row. See if you can catch an example of self-deception. Catch and identify an example. And, if you miss a day, start again at day one. Okay. And to do this, really stay focused. Find the lies behind your reactivity. If you get really reactive, think, what do I have to believe in order to be feeling this way right now? And is it really true? You're often going to find a lie, right? Hiding underneath that we're protecting. That's the shield lies we'll use as being triggered and reactive, right? Why do I believe it's true? Like find your false arguments, the self-justifications, the blame, the avoiding things. Am I truly correct, or am I just telling myself a story? Like, notice in yourself the unacceptable behaviors that you think of in others, right?
Yeah.
Detect disempowering associations that have nothing to do with reality, that we get linked up in our mind, right? So it's like, uncover your hidden motives. Like, what do I really hope to gain by doing this? I know I'm telling people I'm doing this, but what do I really hope to gain? We might pretend like we're looking out for the best interests of everyone, but really we're just being selfish, right? Like a lot of times that's the truth, but we got to get to the truth in order to be able to deal with it. All change, meaningful, lasting change, begins with self-honesty. It's the foundation. All meaningful change begins with self-honesty. So if we really want better conditions for our life, it begins with being honest, right? That's why, like in AA, like they're so big on, denial is the first sign of an alcoholic, right? And, we need to get past that. You need to say, my name is so-and-so and I'm an alcoholic, because that's where change really begins psychologically, right? It's step one, and then so I'd say build the radar for 7 days, and then, just practice being honest, practice being honest in little things. Just change your language. Avoid using exaggeration. Avoid using sarcasm. Avoid using misleading language and metaphors. Start in small ways and build those muscles up, right? Before taking on the bigger things. And then you can use some of the questions that might be relevant to you. You might say, am I in denial about some uncomfortable truths? And just reflect on that a couple times a day, if that's an issue for you, right? How am I responsible? That might be one that you can ask yourself twice a day. You know, my feelings aren't facts. What's really going on here? That might be an important one. Am I making excuses to do bad things? Am I clever enough to see myself the things I criticize in others? How much do I not know that I don't know, right? Like, these are some good reflection questions respective to the 6 different patterns. But you might think, which patterns am I struggling with? And maybe I should check in with those questions twice a day to practice being honest, right? And then I think just persist until you succeed. Get people to call you out. Remember what needs to be remembered. But before you go forward, there's going to be excuses to executing this stuff.
Okay? Of course.
Here's an excuse. I don't lie to myself. Okay. Which self-deceptive example would that be? Which one? Which pattern is that? To say that I don't do it when I do.
I don't remember the terminology for all of them.
Yeah, I know. Reality rejects. It's denial, right?
Yeah.
And somebody else might say, you know, a lot of other people lie to themselves and trick themselves and fool themselves. They're the ones who need to be doing all this. That would be the ashamed attacker.
Yeah.
You're attacking this in others because you're ashamed that you do it deep down. You might say, I don't feel like this stuff will work. I don't feel like this stuff is necessary. You know, that's fools of feeling, using emotional reasoning. Your feeling isn't a try. You haven't even tried it yet. What?
Yes.
You know, you set a limit before you've even tested to see what the limits are. That's an inaccurate way to live your life, right? Some people might say, I don't have time to do all this right now. I'm so overwhelmed. I have so many other things. I'm being pulled in a million different directions. Victimhood fantasizing. You have 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, just like everyone else. It's just a matter of priorities. Don't victimize. Don't pretend to be a victim. Right? You have to live life awake. Well, you're living life awake. Just pay attention to your levels of honesty. It doesn't take any more time, right? No. Other people might say this, oh, but we're supposed to lie to ourselves. It's a good thing, you know, it's a self-defense, right? That's defending evil deeds. That's a self-justification. And I've heard that about every different vice these days. Like, oh, it's good to get angry. Greed is good. You know, you need to get out there and brag and boast and show your strength to the world, which is pride, right? Like, there's all these different, like, they're always going to have people that are defending it, right? And then some people might say, I don't need this. I know what I'm doing. That's an ambassador of arrogance, right? So we want to be able to spot the excuses when they show up so that we can deal with them, because those will show up as you do all of this. They will show up on cue, right?
Yeah.
Any thoughts on that?
Well, honestly, I just think that it's a really good like filter system or radar, like you said, to just be more honest with yourself and ultimately just take responsibility. I think that's the greatest takeaway from this, is just taking more responsibility. I think that would be more enabling and empowering. And I think you would feel more authentic once you recognize these things in yourself, you know, like just being able to call yourself out. Because I no matter what, like in everything you do, you can always kind of blame others, look at others and maybe criticize others. But if we can hone in on ourselves, I think that's like the ultimate power.
Yeah. And I think it's good to buddy up with people and be able to help each other see this. So get permission to help. So I could say to you this, okay, Monica, you want to be happy, right? Ultimately,
yes.
You be happy. What will ultimately make you happier? If you pledge allegiance to self-deception or self-honesty?
Definitely self-honesty, yeah.
Okay, good. Would you give me permission to help get your attention, even on insignificant details, to keep you accountable to self-honesty?
Of course, yeah.
Perfect. Now, I got your permission and consent. So now anytime that you're indulging in self-deception, I can just interrupt you and say, you're lying to yourself. You're lying. And I could just call you and be like, nope, you're lying to yourself. Look, this was fools of feeling. You're using emotional reasoning here. Nope, you're lying to yourself. This is arrogance. You don't have all the facts straight before you form that opinion. right?
Yeah.
You're lying to yourself. You're in denial about your upper potential. Don't tell yourself you can't get that job. You're denying who and what you really are. You can be 10 out of 10 disciplined. You can be 10 out of 10 motivated. Don't beat yourself up. That's another form of lying to yourself, right? Like, so that could be a good thing, is just helping each other stay accountable. So
I love that.
To conclude, just because we know all the information from this discussion doesn't mean we've transcended it. Self-deception will convince you you've mastered this, so you don't need to put in more effort with it. So that's ambassadors of arrogance, is going to say, all right, you got enough, you're good. You don't need to do the 7-day radar building, blah, blah, blah. You're good, right? Once again, that's the excuses coming in. So just beware of that. Step one is really like get yourself to the motivation boiling point, really turn up the dial. It's kind of like Scrooge in that movie, A Christmas Story. It's like he really needed to be emotional about the pain of the past, about his way of being causing the pain of the past. He needed to be emotional about like Ghost of Christmas Present, like how his behavior is creating pain for him in the present. And then he needed to get emotional about Ghost of Christmas Future, which was like looking at his own grave. So we need to take ourselves through that kind of a process as it pertains to our own self-betrayal, lying to ourselves and picking up more troubles as we go. Okay. Just remember that when your ego gets involved, you make terrible decisions. We all do, right? Like, just remember that. That's a good little hack for life. When your ego gets involved, you make bad decisions. Like, let's be honest. So then step two would be like, try to build a better radar. Build a better radar. Try to spot this stuff in others. Maybe in the beginning it'll be easier, and then in yourself. But don't just make this about finding it in other people, because that's also like being like the ashamed attacker. Like, you're just seeing in others and projecting what you're hiding in yourself. So make it a game, 7 days in a row. If you miss a day, start again at day one. Most people would take 4 weeks of trial and error before they could do 7 days in a row. I'm going to challenge you to beat the average. Okay.
Okay.
And I think this is really exciting work, because some of these things are really difficult to detect, but ultimately, if you don't do this, you'll wander about in the bewildering amaze of life's illusions in complete darkness, not really knowing who you are and where you are, like you turned off the lights. This is how you can find yourself, by dropping your self-deceptions. Stop lying about yourself and reality. Like, this is going to be an exciting journey out of that labyrinth, okay? Nothing changes until you change. So your attitude, your approach to life, and the way you're living can all be changed on this very day if you want, right? And we can start by choosing honesty, right? So begin with ourselves. Remember who you're going to choose to serve this day, the dark or the light, self-deception or self-honesty. And you can be free as long as you don't put yourself back in the prison with your own thinking, And if we can train ourselves to be free from self-deception, we can experience the tranquility of mind that comes from speaking and living in truth. Okay, seek the truth and the truth will set you free. That's what this is all about. And it goes much deeper than we think. And I'd say, be patient with this stuff. You can't rip the skin off the snake. It must molt the skin in its own time. So it takes us time to gradually and gently be able to be more honest and build up this habit. Any final thoughts, key takeaways?
No, I think we did a nice, deep, and thorough discussion on this.
Yeah. And this is one of the most important discussions. I would consider it a mandatory discussion in life, because it's all about overcoming these illusions and delusions that are created in life, because that's really the source of great suffering.
Yeah.
And so if we think about the game of life and how to play it, one thing we need to do, almost like being a master chess player, we need to say, self-honesty is the way. It's like, you cannot win this game unless you make this move.
Yeah.
Right. At the end of your days, there's a part of you that will be frustrated, disappointed, and feel unfulfilled. It will be deathbed regrets if we don't take this stuff seriously. So I think it's one of our most important duties and obligations to ourselves and others, and to living the life that we're capable of living, is to decide to live in and with authentic truth.
100%.
Awesome. Okay. Excellent work out there today. Thank you for sharing your wisdom and your time with anyone who may watch the recording after the fact.
Yes.
And